Good morning, everyone. A very warm welcome also from my side. Stan said I head up our cloud research for Europe, and it's my pleasure to be here today in the wonderful springy London. And this topic, multi-cloud, is a topic that is very dear to my heart and where I've spent a lot of time researching it in the last 18 months or so. And I'm looking forward to sharing some of my insights and thoughts around multi-cloud with you today. And I would love to hear your feedback as well in the breaks and the discussions, and to hear from you as well if the messages resonate or if you're disagreeing. Very happy to have an open conversation about that. So what I want to talk to you today about is the what, the how, and the why of multi-cloud. And this is also going to be the structure of my presentation. So I'm going to talk about what is it actually, or what do we define as multi-cloud, then how do you implement it, what are some of the best practices we've seen, and then why are organizations actually engaging in it. So first of all, it's important to understand, I think, what is multi-cloud, because whenever I speak to organizations like yourselves, then every organization has a slightly different view of what multi-cloud means to them. So I think it's important to level set that. But first of all, what we predict in one of our predictions is that by 2023, 90% of the largest organizations in Europe will have a multi-cloud strategy in place, and they will actually be able to also manage it at some level. And the management is really the tricky part around multi-cloud. Because one thing is to have a lot of cloud services, or many multiple cloud services in the organization, but how do you manage across them effectively? And when we look at multi-cloud, we actually take the broadest approach to multi-cloud, or the broadest view. So for us, it also includes private cloud, hosted private cloud, managed cloud services, and then public cloud, of course. So in that sense, it's a very broad definition of multi-cloud. But to look a little bit more into what we see as multi-cloud, then when we started to look at multi-cloud about 18 months ago, almost 2 years ago now, we said that multi-cloud only makes sense at the infrastructure layer, because what we saw, what organizations were trying to achieve, was to have 2 or more services of the same kind where they could switch between them and they could move workloads around. That was the starting point, actually, for our multi-cloud research. And we said, in order to be successful, then you would have a central point of management, and you would need to have this orchestrated by IT. So just a random selection of cloud services that have been purchased by different departments is not really a multi-cloud strategy. So if you really want to have multi-cloud, it needs to be a deliberate strategy. But what we've seen in the last year or so is that actually multi-cloud also makes sense at the other layers of public cloud. It's just different, right? So if we look at the platform as a service layer, what we see here emerging is that organizations are trying to build a platform where they can pick and choose best of breed cloud service components from different cloud providers without being locked into the full stack. And the platform element is the least mature element of these 3 categories in terms of multi-cloud, and also the tools are are not quite there yet. But we see that there is this ambition to not being locked in at this very critical PaaS layer. And then at SaaS, if I had spoken to you a year ago, I would have said multi-cloud doesn't make any sense at the software as a service level, because why would you want to have 2 HR systems or 2 CRM systems running at the same time? You would never want to switch between them. But actually what we are seeing now is that multi-cloud makes a lot of sense at the software as a service layer. It's just, again, very different from infrastructure. It's really about managing a portfolio of software as a service services that organizations are using. And here the problems are very much about managing identity and access management and user access across this vast portfolio of SaaS services. And it's also about making the data fluid. So how can you make sure that you're not creating new silos in the cloud for every SaaS service that you're using, but that you will have some kind of integration or data liquidity, if you want, between the different cloud services. So it's about security very much, it's about data, and then it's about service level monitoring. So very different challenges at the different layers, but nevertheless, organizations need a multi-cloud strategy at all these 3 layers. And when we look at the cloud adoption in the UK, from our latest survey where we interviewed 200 organizations in the UK, we found that every type of cloud is being used in the UK, and actually the UK has the highest cloud adoption across Europe. And it's also from my conversations and engagements, it's the most advanced cloud usage country actually across Europe. And, but you can see that still also private cloud on-premise plays a big role of cloud strategies. Hosted private cloud is even more popular. And then we see that software as a service is the most popular of the public cloud services, followed by infrastructure and then PaaS. And the reason for that is that organizations traditionally, when they started on their cloud journeys 3, 4, 5 years ago, then they would typically start to build a private cloud on-prem, and they would start to use software as a service tools or services. And the IaaS and PaaS categories, they are being more popular in the later years now. And we expect that the biggest increase in adoption will be in the PaaS segment. So infrastructure becomes less relevant because organizations are trying to move one layer up to the PaaS layer, or actually moving all the way up to software as a service if they can. But this picture shows you that there is, like all cloud services are being used, and that's why a multi-cloud strategy is really necessary for organizations. At the moment, I would call this cloud situation for many companies actually multi-cloud chaos, because it's not the result of a deliberate strategy. It's just something that has happened to the organization because of purchase of cloud services for projects, for a proof of concepts, or purchase of cloud services by different lines of business. But usually it wasn't the IT department thinking about a cloud strategy and then executing on it. That is happening now. So we're at this trigger point where IT organizations are looking at this portfolio of cloud services in the organization, and then the task now is to take a very close look and to say, okay, do we actually need all these cloud services, or can we make some choices and put a governance framework in place to say these are the cloud services that we really want, and these are the cloud services that we are going to retire, so that there is some focus and some also economies of scale with the cloud services that are being chosen. But as you can see, the cloud landscape is quite different if we look at infrastructure. Infrastructure and PaaS are really converging at the moment, so it's really hard to draw the line between them, and I think it will be even harder as we see more and more containers being used as well. But then software as a service is a very different marketplace, because there are software as a service solutions for almost every business process out there. So the number of vendors in the SaaS space is much bigger than the number of vendors in PaaS and IaaS spaces. And we also see from our market statistics that the software as a service market is about 2/3 of the public cloud market. So it dwarfs the other two markets by quite a factor. And when I talk about cloud strategies with organizations at the moment, then we've seen a big shift both in conversations but also in our survey data, that in 2017 it was all about cloud also strategies. So cloud was also considered when there was the need to buy new IT infrastructure, but it wasn't necessarily the first choice. And we've seen that shifting a little bit towards cloud-first strategies, but more actually to best-fit strategies. And the reason is that organizations are actually not able to buy all the cloud services that they want to buy, because especially at the SaaS layer, they are not, even though there are many services, there are not enough services. Especially when we look at industry-specific applications, then there are just not enough SaaS services out there. So organizations have gotten very pragmatic about the move to the cloud, saying that, okay, if we can get a cloud service, we will go for a SaaS service first. And that has kind of crystallized in the last 3 or 4 months, is that we see not only cloud-first strategies, but SaaS-first strategies evolving. If we can't get it in SaaS, we will go to PaaS and we will try to build it ourselves. If that's not an option, then we will go to infrastructure as a service, and then we will go to hosted services, managed services, or our own private cloud. So a lot of organizations have created this decision tree of how they want to approach their cloud strategy and where they want to place workloads. And also I see more and more organizations talking about cloud-only strategies this year, where they have a very specific plan in place to close down data centers and move to the cloud 100% if at all possible. And when we look at the stack of how do you, or what are the components that you need to consider if you want to implement multi-cloud strategy, then it's very important to start with the foundation and to build a strong networking foundation. And my colleague Roz is going to talk about the networking later in the day, because what we find is that the more that organizations are moving to cloud-first or cloud-only strategies, they find that the networking really becomes the critical layer. And it's always been critical, but now with this move to the cloud, it really becomes essential, because if the network falls over, basically you don't have connectivity to all your services. So it's we really see that this huge focus on the network. And then the next layer up is the abstraction layer, where organizations need to decide if they want to have a virtual machine-based infrastructure, or increasingly we also see that they are moving to container-based infrastructures and APIs in order to create this integration and also the fluidity of workloads and data. And there's a big shift happening from a virtual machine-based infrastructure to container-based infrastructures. And what we are seeing right now is that organizations who invest heavily in containers, they are better placed to have a multi-cloud strategy and execute on it than a virtual machine-based approach. So I almost see them as two different waves happening, that the first wave of cloud adoption was very much based on virtual machine-based infrastructure, and it's still the vast majority of cloud-based infrastructures is virtual machine-based, but the next wave that's coming is really container-based, and we see very rapid adoption of containers. And then the next wave will be then around APIs, but containers, APIs, and microservices, they are very much the cloud-native tools that are coming. And then the next wave will be serverless functions, cloud functions. So we see these different waves coming, and they come actually faster and faster. So there was like 10, 12 years of virtual machine-based infrastructures. Now, in very rapid succession, we are introducing containers, microservices, APIs. So the time frame has been very much compressed at that layer. Then the next layer that we are seeing is around multi-cloud operations. So how do you actually run a multi-cloud infrastructure? And that creates a lot of complexity for organizations around monitoring of performance across different cloud platforms, around the cost management, the billing, the onboarding, the lifecycle management of projects. How do you shut cloud services down again if they are not used? And that is a very tricky part as well, where we are going to spend a lot of time in our research this year, because we find that that's where organizations are really struggling at the moment. And then the next layer up is then automation. Automation is really helping to solve a lot of these challenges, and that's also where you can automate your deployment, and you really get to true cloud scale operations. And then the top layer around governance and policy is also the layer that really helps to bring strategy to the chaos that I showed you earlier. So that is where organizations are putting these governance bodies in place in order to formulate the decision frameworks for which cloud services to use, when, and how to make these decisions. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later on. So that leads me to the second part of the presentation, which is about how do you implement a multi-cloud strategy successfully. And the first question, of course, to ask here is how many cloud platforms is actually the right number? And this is only at the platform layer, so this is not at the software as a service layer. So this is infrastructure and platform together. And from our developer survey, what we found is that 1/3 of the market, they have just one cloud platform. Then roughly another third of the market, they have two, and then 28% have 3 or more cloud platforms in use. And from conversations that I have with organizations is that Ideally, they would just want one cloud platform because it would just be so much easier to operate one cloud platform. But for many different reasons, they need to have 2 or 3 or even more. And the larger the organization, I find the more cloud platforms they need because they have different user groups that have different requirements. They have different workloads that have specific requirements. And also their customer base is so diverse that the customers are starting to mandate different cloud platforms as the backend for services provided. So there are multiple drivers for why organizations would have multiple cloud platforms. So I can't give you like the golden number. You need to have 2.5 cloud platforms or something, but just to give you an idea, and it will depend a lot on the size of the organization, how many cloud platforms make sense for your organization. And some of the pros and cons of multi-cloud. So one of the big drivers for multi-cloud is actually that organizations want to have access to best-of-breed cloud components and also access to multiple innovative cloud ecosystems. That is actually the key driver, because when we started the research almost 2 years ago, it was all about avoidance of lock-in. We don't want to be locked into one vendor. But that is actually, as a driver, not as strong anymore as the access to innovation and access to best-of-breed cloud service components. So we've seen this shift already in the last year of why organizations are moving to multi-cloud. And then the challenges, of course, are all around operational complexity. So especially, how do you manage the billing with different cloud providers? How do you manage the cost? A lot of organizations, they don't even understand the bills that they get from these providers. And then if you have multiple providers, it's near impossible. It's also very hard to manage service levels across different clouds, because if your business service transverses different clouds or is being made up of different clouds, then if the business service isn't working, then it's really hard to pinpoint which part of the chain has fallen over, because usually all the cloud services would report that they are up and running, but yet your business process is not up and running. So how do you find out where your chain has broken, basically? And then what we also find is that it's actually quite hard from a people perspective to operate a multi-cloud environment, because it's hard enough to get deep skills in one cloud technology, but to have skills in multiple cloud technologies, and then also cloud architects who can architect across multiple clouds and have like an overarching enterprise architecture. They are very, very scarce in the market, and everybody wants to hire them, right? The cloud providers are expanding like crazy. Their services partners are also investing heavily, and then end-user organizations are also trying to hire these cloud skills. So that it's a very overheated market. So most organizations, they would love to just have one cloud, basically, because it keeps it easier. But then for the reasons I mentioned, they are almost forced into a multi-cloud strategy. And we have also created a readiness model, and Dan mentioned it earlier, that we have actually run this readiness model last year in a big pan-European survey, where we had 100 respondents from the UK as well. And the readiness model has 5 dimensions. So we look at cloud vision, cloud economics, process and compliance, technology, and people and culture. It's 14 questions in total. And then we calculate your readiness overall, but also in these 5 dimensions. And you will get a report on how ready your organization is. So if that is of interest, then I think we will send you a link, or we have already sent you a link. And there's also an IDC table out there in the exhibition hall where you can approach my colleagues and talk to them about filling in this report. And these are the results that I'm showing you here, are the results from the Pan-European survey. So what we found is that 9% of organizations, they are what we call the pathfinders. So they are the ones that started early on with their multi-cloud strategy. And they have already worked it out pretty much. So 9% of organizations, they are almost at the end of the journey, even though it's a moving target. And 42% of organizations are just following after. But that leaves almost half of the market still trying to figure out how to actually operate in this new multi-cloud world. And if we look at where the challenges are, then it's actually not so much around technology, because the technologies are out there. We see a lot of established vendors, but also startups participating in the market, and the technologies are maturing rapidly. But the biggest challenge that organizations have is around people and culture. What I'm seeing now, or starting to see now in response to this challenge around people and culture, is that organizations are starting to create these cloud centers of excellence. And when I presented on this topic in Germany a month ago, then we had about 7 people out of the audience in the room already had established a cloud center of excellence. So it's still very early days, but I would be actually quite interested what if you could just do a show of hands if you already have a cloud center of excellence in your organization. Just so 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, cool. Good, yeah. I mean, it's only just starting, but I think it's necessary because like the situation of multi-cloud chaos that I mentioned earlier comes from the fact that it's very much spread out, right? Different business units are working on the cloud. Everybody is experimenting, trying to find out how they can make it work, where it makes sense. And this cloud center of excellence is really there to consolidate these efforts and to create a focal point and create a center of gravity where people can exchange their cloud skills and really lift the cloud competency of the whole organization. And what we are seeing is that these cloud centers of excellence, they need a diverse set of stakeholders. So, of course, the CIO, CTO should be involved, but we also see that the developers should be represented. So that could be the king of DevOps or the DevOps teams. We need the software engineers to be part of it. But we also need the IT procurement is a very critical part of this team, and then also the line of business executives, because they need to describe their requirements and then help the team to really work towards the business requirements. And then if we look at what are the responsibilities of the Cloud Center of Excellence, then you can see that it's both about facilitating the process in the organization, but also to drive standardization, so that it's a more aligned execution of the cloud strategy than what we've seen in the past. So the tasks can range all the way from creating alignment between the business strategy and the cloud strategy, to create a team of advisors that can go out into the line of business and help them to work on their cloud projects. They support of course, the implementations. They have to do a lot of communication, actually, to describe the benefits of the cloud strategy, but also the framework of the cloud strategy. And then they are also responsible for data governance and security, because data is usually the critical point and the sticky point as well in cloud decisions. And they need to devise the overall architecture of the cloud strategy.
So a quick silly question. What's the difference between that and an effectively run architecture function?
So that's a very good question. So the question is, what's the difference between a cloud center of excellence and an architecture function? And I think they have a lot of common elements, and we would definitely also see architects to be part of this team. I think it's just about where you want to put the organizational emphasis. If you want to have a team of excellence around architecture in general, or if you want to have a team of excellence around cloud as a technology area. So I think it's more about where in your organization it makes sense to put the emphasis. But we would definitely also see architects as part of this team. But what we are also seeing is that it's not just about the cloud center of excellence, because organizations also might have a DevOps center of excellence or an AI center of excellence if they are going down this technology road. And especially with these emerging technologies, I think it makes sense, at least for a short time, to have this technology focus and then maybe go back into a more generic function afterwards. So I mean, it's different options, but this is what I'm seeing emerging at the moment. Then the last part of the organization is, so why are organizations actually doing multi-cloud? Because if it's complex and it's potentially hard to manage, then it might be easier to just use one cloud, right? But the advantages of using multiple cloud services are really linked to to helping organizations with their digital transformation strategies. So we see that cloud is not just a technology choice or a different infrastructure or a different delivery model of software that organizations are opting in for, but it's really about enabling a broader vision around digital transformation. So we see that it very much enables the move towards agile working and not just agile software development and deployment, but really agile in the broadest sense, so also taking agile methodologies out into the lines of business. We also see that it enables a different way of working. So FOW is the future of work. That's also a research practice that we have, where we see that organizations are really changing the way how they collaborate, both internally but also with partners and suppliers and customers. And that is also enabled largely by the cloud, because the cloud enables to really use to reach users that are very much dispersed. And then, interestingly, we also see that multi-cloud strategy helps with legacy integration. And in the past, when we talked about hybrid cloud, it was mainly about how do you connect an on-premise private cloud to the public cloud. So it was the direction from on-prem to the public cloud. What we are now seeing, and what I think will be a bigger trend this year, next year, is that we actually take the technologies that are being used in the cloud and we see them come back into the data center. So the direction is actually changing. And that's again where containers, microservices, and especially APIs play a key role, because a lot of organizations start to use APIs and API management to connect their cloud-native applications and their legacy systems. And then underneath all that is access to the digital ecosystem. And one of our predictions from digital transformation is that competition will be not anymore around one company against another company, but it's actually going to be a competition between ecosystems of innovation. And these ecosystems are emerging on cloud platforms. So that's why it's so important to be part of at least one, but preferably more than one ecosystem of innovation as well. And then the other reason is, if we look a little bit more in detail of why you need a multi-cloud strategy, then we can see that this move to digital transformation is driving a lot of new technology requirements, but also the need to create new revenue streams, the need to reduce time to value, and to have this much faster pace of change and agility. And that's where cloud platforms really deliver. And help to enable these changes that are necessary. And then what we are also seeing is that a lot of the innovation that's happening in the market is actually built on the cloud. So we have one research practice around edge computing. And last year there were these kind of discussions: is the edge going to eat the cloud? Is the cloud dead, basically? And but our view on this is that the edge and cloud have actually a very close and complementary relationship. So you can't really have a successful edge strategy without a cloud strategy. And we see that the cloud also expands more and more out to the edge. So there is a very clear linkage between edge computing and cloud. And similarly, around blockchain technologies, they are also largely being developed and operated on the cloud, even though they are on-premise options, but we see a lot of implementations on the cloud. And then, of course, machine learning and artificial intelligence is also very much run on the cloud. And then AR, VR. So all these new technologies, they are almost developed cloud first, and then there might or might not be an on-premise option for those as well. And if we look at our spending guides, actually, then what we find is that that there's still a lot of technology or innovation running on-premise, but we see that the share of the cloud is expanding over time. And with that, I want to give you a few pieces of advice around your multi-cloud strategy. So first of all, tackle the chaos if you still have that in your organization, and get an overview of all the cloud services in use. I know that maybe 3 or 4 years ago we talked a lot about shadow IT, but now it's really about understanding what which services are in use, and how can IT enable these services. And then take the control back, and really become the enabler of the cloud strategy, and maybe bundle all the cloud expertise in the Cloud Center of Governance. And that's also where you would develop this governance framework to make deliberate cloud decisions and not ad hoc cloud decisions. And then the last advice is really innovate. So dive into these ecosystems of innovation. Don't build stuff on your own that you can get from the cloud. And a lot of it is out there, and the cloud providers are really innovating at a very fast pace. So make use of these kind of Lego blocks when you build your own services and applications. So with that, I thank you very much for your attention. I'm going to be around the whole day, so feel free to approach me and give me your feedback. Also, if you don't agree, I'm very happy to hear your views. Thank you very much.